Now, without further ado, I'd like to introduce Dr. David Ernst. He's the Chief Information Officer of the College of Education and Human Development at the University of Minnesota. He's also the Director of the Center for Open Education and the Executive Director for the Open Textbook Network. Now, before I bring him up here, I want to say the theme this year is growing your tech ecosystem. Now, that refers to not just the hardware, the great hardware that we might get from some of our vendors here, not just the instructional strategies that we're going to learn about from one another, not just the open educational resources that are part of, we've got an entire track, if you look tomorrow, on open educational resources. But we want to think about growing our tech ecosystem to include all of these things. Now, we were promised when iPads came out that we were all going to be reading electronic books by now, right? That they were all going to be just there, the book was going to go away, publishers weren't going to be anymore. But what we've seen is that, if anything, access to educational materials has become more restrictive, more expensive, and less user-friendly than it was before. And what the work that David is doing is very important, and I would say undermining that process and providing an opportunity for people to get access to the informational texts that they need to grow their tech ecosystem in a way that's both responsible, educationally rigorous, but also cost-effective and takes into account that we're no longer printing all of these materials necessarily. Now, just because it's an open textbook doesn't mean that it's electronic necessarily. It just means that it's you can freely reuse and remix it. So, without further ado, I'd like to invite David up here to talk about that. So, David Ertz, everybody.
Thanks, Ryan. Okay. Well, thank you very much. It is really nice to be here in this beautiful place. I love Minnesota, but it does not have mountains. And it's just so nice to wake up and look out and see that. I also want to say I'm really impressed by, like, Minnesota. We don't have something like this in Minnesota or in the Midwest. Would you consider the Midwest and Northwest MET? Is that all right? Maybe the acronym's getting a little long, but I want MET money. Okay, so my background. You saw all my titles. That doesn't tell you too much. My background's ed tech. Last 25 years or so. First half of that, maybe the first 10 or so in K-12, and then these last, whatever is left, at the University of Minnesota. And my Ph.D. is in educational technology as well. And I'm bringing that up because I guess I'm kind of embarrassed in a way. Like, you're ed tech people. You know why you got into this, right? You're excited about the potential of a technology to improve teaching and learning. Did I think that I would spend a big chunk of my life focused on textbooks? Not exactly. Not exactly at all. It's almost the iconic 20th century kind of Luddite thing, right? Textbooks. In fact, there's so many initiatives right now that people are trying to get out of textbooks, like trying to, other digital materials or what. Anyway, so my point is, I never thought I'd be doing this, but I will tell you that now that I am, I think it's the most important thing that I have done. And will continue to spend a big chunk of my life working on it because I think that it can make more of an impact for students than anything that I've worked on, any technology I have run across or worked with. You might disagree with me by the end here, but we'll see how it goes. I'll say that, the other thing that is so great about organizations like this is this kind of common good, collective action. You can accomplish a lot together. Because you're working for the common good. The reason I got into this was not about textbooks. It was about this. It was about this kind of common good, this thing that I think everyone who works in higher education values, access to higher education, right? When I first saw this, my first kind of US-centric perspective on it was, oh, those poor people in other countries who don't have access to higher education. But as I worked more and more on this project, I realized that it's actually quite an issue here, isn't it? This is a study done for the US Department of Education showing that in the first decade of this century, there were 2.4 million students who didn't finish college because of cost. There were a lot more who didn't finish college, that just didn't, but these are the ones attributed to cost. And these are also college qualified. In other words, the study defined them as, excuse me, they took all the right classes, they did well enough in those classes in high school, and then because of cost, they didn't finish. That, to me, tells me that there is an issue here. There's an access issue. And the majority of the time, we kind of accept it. I mean, we may not be aware of it, first of all, but we do kind of accept it in that, you know, like, what are you going to do? What are the options, right? And it's kind of crept up on us. This shows for public institutions our two main sources of funding, right? This is true universally here. Their two main sources are tuition and state funding. So this is national data. Excuse me. This is about when I ended my 6 years of undergrad. Right here, if you look at the percentage of the cost that was my burden and the percentage of the cost that was common good, the state. And now look at that today. It's changed quite a bit. There's much more of a burden on our students. Here's Montana. So it went from, for students, about $2,000 of the load to $6,000. This is inflation adjusted as well. So they've almost tripled the load on students in Montana. Here's Idaho. Here's Washington. And here's Oregon. I kind of assumed these are the 4 states that are most represented here, right? So I think Oregon wins. These lines crossed. This is what Minnesota looks like too. The lines crossed right about that same time, right about 2010, 2011. And so the students are now bearing the majority of the burden of the cost. So that's the situation for students right now. It's different than it's ever been before. It is different. The burden that they are carrying is different. So what can they do about it? Like, if you take a student here and a student over there, what can they do differently to make this work? They have a couple of options. I mean, if they're going to assume that they're going to go, loans. There's the big one, right? And you hear a lot about student loans nationally, politically. You're hearing about default rates and students getting out of college and not being able to buy a house because they're already underwater with student loans and all of those things. What's the other one? Work. They could work. They could work or they could borrow. Suppose they could steal, but no. Work and borrow. And so let's look at working and what it's like to kind of work your way through college. Now, this is University of Minnesota data because this is what I had access to. But if you look back, so what this represents, what this shows is the number of hours at a minimum wage job a student would need to work to afford a year of tuition at the University of Minnesota. The University of Minnesota's tuition is around $13,000 a year, just so you know, understand that. If you look back in the 60s, it would take, it's 60s to the 80s, it's 200 to 400 hours, right? And if you do the math on that, divide by 40 hours a week, that's like 10 weeks. That's a summer job, right? Some of you may have gotten close to, you know, paying for your schooling with a summer job, or at least tuition. This is just tuition, by the way, not room and board, not books, not anything else. So we're getting a full-time job year-round would be 52 weeks times 40 hours a week. That's 2,080 hours. We're getting a lot closer to it. It went down there. I just updated it because the minimum wage in Minnesota jumped up from 7-something to 9-something. think it's $9.25 or something like that. So it's getting better, but it'll now sit there for a while, I think, and the tuition will keep going up, so it'll start climbing again. So it's getting closer and closer to a student needing to be a full-time employee, work full-time to be able to afford a year of tuition, which is not what we want them to do, right? They're supposed to be full-time students, right? And again, this is only tuition, not room and board, not any other expense, okay? So that's what it's harder and harder to work your way through school. Now this is borrowing. About 2/3 of our students nationally borrow money to make it through school, come out with loans, and of those students, they borrow more than about $30,000, a little over $30,000. That's the average loan that they come out with. Here are the state averages, so you're low compared to the rest of the country. You're under the average there. Here's what debt looks like nationally. So what does that mean? You know, what does $30,000 mean? These two lines, the orange line here is credit card debt nationally. The blue line is student debt. You can see where our financial bubble happened, 2008, 2009, and people kind of slowed down or at least leveled off their borrowing on credit cards. But that student loans continue to shoot up pretty consistently. The shocking thing to me about this data is that this is only 11 years ago, and you're at $500 billion. Now we're at 1.3, right? Again, that's why you're hearing about this more and more politically. You're hearing about it, you know, it was in the presidential campaign, free tuition, all of that, because they know that there is pain here, real pain. So why are these, what are these costs exactly that students are paying? And the federal government requires every institution in the country, including yours, to outline these costs. And these are the categories that they come up with: tuition and fees, room and board, books and supplies, personal expenses, transportation. And every institution in the country has to give an estimate of that. And we're going to look at some of those here. You can see some of your, and you can easily find these estimates for yourself. Which one of these are we going to focus on here today? Can you figure that out? Books and supplies. I do want to point out, it is not the biggest expense up there, is it? Not even close. Depending on what institution you're at. At Minnesota, it's not even close. Why are we talking about this one then? You can do something about it, that's right. And usually I'm presenting to faculty, and I tell faculty, you can do something about it. In fact, you are the only one who can do something about it. Right? Academic freedom, right? No one's supposed to be able to tell you what to choose. But there's one other reason too, in that it may be a fraction of the total cost. It may not be the biggest expense, but it has a disproportional impact on student success. And we'll see why. Let's look at textbook prices, first of all. This is at the core of the problem. The blue line is inflation, consumer price index. The orange line is textbook prices. There was a study done by an economist, the University of Michigan system. And here's the quote in the article. It says, textbook prices have all been going up at a much faster rate than any other consumer product. Anything. Which surprised me. I would have assumed that there were things like maybe medical costs but no. The fastest growing consumer product cost. This is what the College Board says students should budget. And this is based on what institutions are estimating for their students. Right? About $1,300 a year. You can look this up for any institution. I looked it up for our hosts here today. It's right in that range. If you want to know your institution, all you do have to do is Google your institution's name and estimated cost of attendance. Again, by federal law, they have to post these estimates so people know, students know what they're getting into cost-wise. The University of Minnesota is 1,000. I've seen it range from 300 to 2,000 something. Keep in mind so whatever yours says, it says, keep in mind the federal government says you have to estimate it, it doesn't say how. So you can't really compare, don't compare them. So if yours says 500, don't feel too good about that. No. So students, I should point out, don't actually spend this much. This is what they're told to budget. They don't actually spend that. Why do you think that is? Don't buy the books. And you ask any faculty member you work with out there, they know this story. They see it all the time. Students not showing up with the books, and they didn't read it because they don't have the book. They didn't read, the assignment. So they actually spend in the range of probably $600 to $800 or so. Why is that? Well, I haven't been a student for a long time, so obviously. So I did record a few really short videos that to bring the student voice to this is really about them. Just asking some simple questions. Here's the first one. What do you think about the cost of textbooks?
I think they're really valuable, but the cost is just a little too much for students who are already paying a lot for tuition.
Find a way to make costs more manageable because tuition's going up, everything's going up, cost of living's going up, and then textbooks are going up.
There is definitely a value to them, but maybe not for the cost that we pay for them.
I mean, I guess professors are trying to provide students with books that are reasonable, but I mean, there are some textbooks that are just they're just way too pricey.
I just feel like they're really overpriced. Yeah.
I get frustrated when you have to buy a book that's expensive that you don't use.
Textbooks are only used for so long before you're done with them, so it's like, use it for a couple months and then probably never touch it again.
If people weren't just issuing new editions and just increasing prices, rather stick to what you have.
It is kind of expensive, and sometimes I feel like I have to buy the textbook because it is required.
But it does kind of suck to throw away so much money on something that you'll only use for a semester.
They should keep the same textbook for several years because the material doesn't change that much.
I have purchased them and I don't use them, which is kind of frustrating.
I think it's outrageous, actually. Yeah, they cost way too much in general, I think.
So, in summary, nobody said they don't cost enough, okay? And no one even said it's reasonable, to be honest. It was really, for each student, they were kind of like, really? The cost? The thing I like about that video, and there's nothing mind-blowing there, right? I mean, this is stuff they're not saying anything that we don't already kind of understand about their situation, but, they're being reasonable. They're kind of saying, yeah, we get it. They're important for my courses, but, and then they list a whole litany of things that are challenging to them. I've had some people say that it's pretty clear that the University of Minnesota bookstore doesn't need to sell textbooks because they're obviously doing really well with apparel. I don't know if you notice that. A lot of maroon and gold, and big M's. You can hear the tension though, right? You can hear kind of like, this is challenging, right? And so when the cost of textbooks becomes something they have to deal with, they find strategies to deal with it if they can't afford it. This is what we're hearing from students about how they're dealing with these costs. Now, I don't want to confuse this with what bookstores are doing. Bookstores are doing all sorts of stuff. I mean, there are rental models and electronic digital versions, and you know some of this stuff, and used and all the things we're familiar with. This isn't that. This is what our student strategies for dealing with the costs. I have 5 things here. One of them I've kind of separated from the rest for a reason. It's a little different. But purchasing older editions, delaying buying, never buying, and then sharing, which has become much more common the last, I'd say, 2 years, year and a half, 2 years. And then downloading from the internet. Downloading what? You notice I didn't write anything incriminating there. They're downloading versions of the digital copies of the textbooks, and you can find any textbook. Just Google it. Just put the textbook title and author and put PDF at the end. and you'll have it in 2 or 3 clicks. And about 1/3 of our students on surveys say that they do that. I separated it because it's different. How is it different than the top 4? It's illegal, right? They're taking a legal risk by doing that, apparently. So let's talk, so that one I'm not really going to talk about, but the top 4 I want to talk about a little bit and kind of look at, they're taking a little bit of a different kind of a risk with those top 4, aren't they? What kind of a risk are they taking there? Yeah, an academic risk, right? Whether they pass, so let's look at these. So purchasing an older edition of the textbook. This is one young man who told me he was asked to buy an $80 textbook. He found one on Amazon that was 2 editions older, and it was $8. And he said that's what he could afford. That's what he did, and this was his quite understandable rationalization, I think, actually. But he also said to me, like in the very next sentence, he's like, but I get that it's a risk. I get that I'm taking a risk because the readings might be wrong or different in the 2 editions. So he understood that, but he was willing to take the risk. And in survey after survey after survey, that's what you see students saying. Yeah, we know this isn't the best thing, but it's what I could afford, and I'm willing to take that academic risk. So that's the situation we're putting them in. Delaying buying. Now there's 2 types, I kind of categorize it into 2 different situations of delaying buying. Here's one, it's kind of a hard line one. It's saying, if you get financial aid, you generally need to wait 3 weeks or so, right? Until you get it, till after the drop deadline, typically, right? Because they don't want to give you the money until they know you're in for good. Same with the GI Bill. There's a similar kind of delay in paperwork and issues that way. So they may go 3 weeks without the book. 3 weeks of, I don't know, getting by, borrowing people's, whatever, to do assignments and whatever. So there's that. That's one kind of category, these kind of hard lines of just the system is set up that way, they have to wait. The other one, so last year, I have 3 sons. Last year they were all in college. So, yikes. We survived that. There's 2 in college. One got out. He has a job. He's not living at home. Yay. But the 2 are still in, and they'll still be in next year as well. And it's not like it was a surprise. Like we knew this was coming for 18 years, right? So we told them, like we've saved what we could, but we really need your help. You need to live like a student. And I think most students are either told that or just live that, right? I mean, they just have to. They know it. And so I'll ask my sons, I'll ask them at the beginning of the semester, hey, did you buy your textbooks yet? And what do you think their response is? Yeah, it's generally, I think I'm going to wait until I see if I really need them, right? And that has become the rule, not the exception. That's from my experience. Now, you could argue that that's their choice and it's whatever. They're dealing themselves that damage. But it's the situation we're in, and it's what students are doing. They are asked to live like students. My sons, thankfully, have been living like students. I appreciate that, but this is the implication. This is what happens when you ask them to do that, and then the picture in their mind of they have to make value judgments all the time. And you saw in that video what kind of value, is it worth the money? They're struggling with that, right? All right, so there's that. Here's the second video where that's all we did was just ask them that question.
I usually wait until I feel like there's a need in the class to buy the textbook, or if I'm falling behind and I can't find another resource for free online that would also give me that information. And then I'll buy a textbook.
I have delayed purchasing a textbook until it was completely necessary to have it.
Yes, I have, unfortunately. I had some troubles because of it. Textbooks are obviously something that you really obviously need, and in order to do well in a class, you need to have that textbook, and because it costs so much, I think a lot of people have problems getting the required text, and therefore they have struggled in classes they shouldn't necessarily struggle in.
Okay. I don't know if you caught that first gentleman, but he said he waits until he's falling behind, right? And it's kind of like, oh, the academic risk is getting too big, and now I might have to buy it, and they're balancing those 2 things. not buying one at all. So I've seen several surveys now that say between maybe 60 and 70% of students say that they don't buy in any given, at some point in their academic career, have not purchased a required textbook because of the cost, just flat out didn't buy it. And it ends up being about a third of students every semester say that they didn't buy at least one required textbook. The last one, I've got a little different approach to this one, the sharing one. That one was kind of new to me about a little over a year ago. I started hearing it more and more from students. But I heard it from him first a couple years ago when I interviewed this gentleman. So it's a little different video. I just sat down with this one student and kind of talked about his experience. And he has a number of strategies, but sharing textbooks was one of them. And I want you to hear what he has to say about that.
I'm a business student at Carlson. Right now I'm a freshman, so I'm pre-major, but I'm looking to study entrepreneurial management and maybe a minor in management information system. I actually decided to buy only 2 of the required textbooks after kind of poking around and really asking people who have taken the courses because I simply couldn't afford it. That's when I said I took out 2 alternative loans from my brothers, that was to pay for the cost of textbooks on top of the tuition. And so I have 2 of the required textbooks. I'm sharing a 3rd textbook between 2 of my roommates and a guy down the hall. And and the other 2 I don't really worry about because, I mean, I don't have enough money for that right now, to be honest. But it becomes bothersome when you have to travel, to another dorm just to read your own textbook. But I'd say there's some times where they're like, I need the book right now. I can't give it to you. And so I just kind of have to twiddle my thumbs until late at night when they're done, and then I can read the book, and then usually I get shorted on sleep or something. Sometimes I've had to stay up as late as 3, 4, or 5 a.m. and then go to sleep, get 3 hours, get up and go to class because, that's when the textbook was available to me. A lot of the times it was just you got shorted on sleep or you didn't have enough time to study as you want because I had to pass the textbook off to someone else that needed it. It's just kind of challenging because it's like, you're struggling to get enough money, and it's always kind of in the back of your mind to worry throughout your day that do I have enough money to pay for my textbooks or pay my brothers back kind of thing. So it's difficult. I might actually end up having to schedule my courses around what my roommates and people that I know are taking, because if they have a shared textbook, then I might have to take that class kind of thing, because if it's something that maybe doesn't interest me, but it fulfills a requirement or elective, I might have to take that because that's $200 less in textbooks. I'm still kind of shocked because I'm completely broke from buying textbooks last year. So I have to take out a loan and kind of manage which ones I'm gonna buy. And it's just kind of, it always, the second tuition, I call it, always kind of surprises me. Just this past year, I've probably spent in the ballpark of $1,000, and I haven't even bought all of the required texts that they told me to buy. It's been, it's been difficult.
So you can hear the complexities of sharing, first of all, right? Not having, I can't imagine how that could possibly work. The demand for the textbook would be the same. Like, they'd sit unused probably for weeks, and then the day night before the test, everyone would want it. But anyway, you can hear the complexity. Like, he couldn't study as long as he wanted to because he had to pass the book off, or he had to wait till the middle of the night and losing. Anyway, the thing, so that's about the sharing. But I'll tell you that it took me, I think I probably recorded this at least 2 years ago now. It took me about 1.5 years to not be visibly angry after watching it, even after I've seen it dozens of times, because you listen to the experience of this student. Like, what else could we possibly ask him to do? He has a job. He's also being paid for medical research as a medical research subject. He took out all the loans he could, and then you heard him talk about, he called them the alternative loans from his brothers. He's, what he said, he bought 2 books, he's borrowing 1 book, and then the other 2 he just said I can't worry about because I don't have the money right now. Like, what else could we possibly ask of him, to be a successful student? This is the situation we're in right now, and this is the result. These are surveys of students, about 22,000, I believe, students in Florida, talking about the impact of cost, textbook cost, on their academic success. And you can see why, I think, right? Especially after listening to that last young man. Why this possibly could happen, these things. So, are we depressed yet? I wanted to spend this early time here just defining the problem. That is the problem, the main problem that we're trying to solve. There also are some, so now it's all gonna be up from here. We're gonna talk about solutions, and there are gonna be some almost byproduct benefits from these solutions I wanna show you too. But hopefully, I hope you would agree that something should be done. I think we can't accept this really any longer. And as I'll tell you nationally, another reason it's really good to be here, nationally I'm usually talking to libraries. Librarians. Librarians have kind of jumped in and they're kind of working on this problem. Any librarians in here? Yay, all right. I'm sorry, but the ed techs, we're not quite as much. We're kind of missing the boat, and there's a huge role to be played here. Librarians are typically see themselves as helping faculty find academic materials. I mean, that's kind of right. You manage academic materials and help faculty connect with them and find them and use them. Ed tech folks have the teaching and learning expertise. We have the ability to come in and work with a faculty member to say, I think the instructional designers who work for me, I think they basically think of their job as to make sure that the learning environment, or to do what they can with the learning environment, so to enhance or teaching and learning. Is this have an impact on the learning environment? Absolutely. Obviously a huge impact. So I think we have some space here, different from the librarians, to work in. So, all right, so there we go. Okay, let's talk about solutions. How could we solve that? How could we get those percentages down to 0? Not shrink them, I want 0. Even if it seems ideal, what would be a solution here? Free textbooks, which does seem kind of idealistic, doesn't it? And not maybe realistic, I don't know. But, right, we would agree that if the textbooks were free, there's no way that they could cause any of this, right?
Engaged administrations, because I would be imagining at each of our universities and colleges, we have student retention as a big issue to keep
right.
our students involved. This is a big piece of that.
Yeah, this is pretty damning, isn't it? Right, exactly. Thank you. So the question that always comes up with free textbooks is the answer I was looking for here, because that is what would solve this and bring these down to 0. How do you end up, anyone in here written a textbook? Can I ask you a question or two? Okay, you don't have to answer, I'll ask. How long did it take you? 3 years, and obviously between other things you're doing, and right? Yep. And I would say that's 2 to 3 years, something like that, is what I hear quite often from faculty. It's a long process, right? So why would someone do it for free? Something else you should know: most faculty don't get a ton of credit for writing a textbook. It's not like writing a journal article, or right? You don't get a lot of promotion and tenure street cred for that. So why would you write one for free? So I'd like to question, that's where I got stuck, I'd say about 10 years ago. I'm like, this open stuff looks good, but I don't see the motivations. I don't see how it could work, and there's no business model for this. business model in a loose, like the motivations have to all be aligned and everything fits and works. I want to show you that I have realized that there is absolutely a business model for this. And not only is there this one that we could maybe do someday, it's happening. It's moving really fast, in fact. So let's look at business models. Let's look at how publishing works right now. So my goal here is to show you that this is possible. Free textbooks are possible. A publisher, this is the model as it exists now. A publisher writes they publish a textbook. It costs money, tens if not hundreds of thousands of dollars. They sell it, money goes back, they recoup their costs, they have money to pay royalties to the author. There you go, right? Oversimplified, of course, but generally this is it, right? They're motivated to publish because they know money is going to come back. The author's motivated to write it because they know there's going to be money there as well. There you go. There's one thing that's missing here that's really important that I want to mention. Copyright. If copyright didn't exist, would this model work? Why not? Right, no one would buy it, right? Maybe one person would buy it, and the rest of them copy it. Right? That's what I do. So copyright's important. It's important to our intellectual work that we all do and our faculty do. It's a really important thing. So anyway, so here's the model. So here are two other models I want to show you. And the first one I'm just going to kind of whip by quick because I have to acknowledge it exists, but I don't think, it might be, but I don't think it's our future, a big part of it. The second model I want to spend more time on because it's the one that's really moving forward. Here's the first model, pretty complex. Somebody writes a book, puts it out there to the world, and we're done. These are the people who are willing to write a book for free. And oftentimes when I'm talking with faculty about this, faculty go, yeah, like I pretty much wrote a book for these courses that I teach because I wanted it to do, you know, they're doing it for themselves and for their students. And then they say, here world, like what am I going to do with it? If you want to use it, go for it, right? Those are out there. And I know of dozens of textbooks that are being used by other faculty that are out there and actively being used for free. Here's the other model. See if you can find what's different from the first model. What did I add? The magic funder, right? And I admit you could solve any world problem if you had a funder. But in this case, well, let's just look at the model. Let's just say this happened. A funder says to a publisher, tell you what, we will give you money to publish a textbook. Right? It costs money to publish a textbook. If they give the money, there is money for the author. Right? Now, there's one stipulation. The funder would say, we'll give you money to do this, but that textbook has to be free forever for students. They should be able to copy it and give it to each other and not have to pay for it. And right? They should just put it out there in the open and let people do what they want with it. That's the stipulation. We'll give you money, but that's the deal. Okay? Now, again, the funder thing I know seems kind of like, yeah, that'd be great, wouldn't it? But here's what's happening. There is funding happening and growing quickly. Universities are funding their own faculty to write textbooks. I'll come back to that one in a second. Foundations, the Hewlett Foundation, the Gates Foundation, and several other foundations have poured tens of millions of dollars into writing these textbooks, into publishing these, with that stipulation that they be free forever. Governments have spent money. I don't know if the bill is still there, but there has twice now been a bill introduced to the US Senate to support these kinds of efforts. California passed one. British Columbia funded it through their Ministry of Education. Also, consortia of institutions have gotten together, pooled their money. All they have to do is write one book and they can all use it, right? I mean, it benefits everybody. CALI is the computer-assisted legal instruction. If you have a law school in your institution, they are almost certainly a member of CALI. It's a consortium of pretty much every law school in the country. They pool their money. And they write about 30 textbooks, and they update them every year because laws change, right? So they keep it going, and they are there to be used by anybody. These are the ones that are growing really quickly. The foundation are still there. The government, that's come and go. I mean, there's more and more funding for programs, but maybe not publishing. But universities are getting into the game. I only listed 3 of them there, but there's dozens now who want to publish, are trying to find the money to, are trying to piece together a program. And consortia of schools are starting to do the same thing. So in other words, higher education is funding this, and that's the business model. I have a friend who said there is a business model for open, it's called schools. We do a lot of things at our institutions that we spend money on, like ed tech, that we do because we think it's the right thing for the mission. It's the right thing for our students. This is one of those things, in my not so humble opinion, that we should be funding and doing. And it's happening. It's growing. Here's some books. This one came from Portland State. It's a GIS book. There's a math book from SUNY. These are books funded by the Gates and Hewlett and other foundations from Rice University. Their goal was to create the top 25 books for the top 25 enrolled courses in the country. And they're pretty much there. I think they're up to maybe 24. And now they're starting to create second editions. And they're moving into a model of being self-funded, not foundation-funded. That was just to kind of kick them off. That's a long story, but here are the Cali books. This is a really old screenshot, because obviously maybe 2-year-old screenshot. Where the books all have dates on them because they do update them every year as laws change, right? The law school books. So this model not only works, but it is growing quickly. It's already happening. This isn't a dream that someday maybe someone should do this. It's happening already. There's one thing, however, there's one piece that's still missing from this model, and that has to do with this. Remember that? So, how many of you are like Moodle administrators? I know you are, Ryan. So Moodle, did you buy Moodle? Did you buy Moodle? No. Where'd you get it from? The internet. Did you break the law and download some software without paying for it? There you go. So it's somebody owns that intellectual property of Moodle. Somebody owns it, but they have given permission. Ryan, did you call that person and say, hey, do you mind if I download it? Why not? Because? How did you know it was open source? There you go. The license was put on the software. You can go look at the documentation for the software and see, oh, there's a GNU public, what's it called? Public, I forget what it's called. The license. Yeah. Public license. Yeah, anyways. Yes, the GNU layout. So, I don't know if you're supposed to pronounce it GNU. Yeah, okay. Or GNU. Anyway, so there you go. So there's a model where someone took some time and expense, built something, and then said to the world, here you go, you can have it, and gave them a license up front to say, here's what you can do with it. You can copy it, you can install it yourself if you want, you can do right, you can do all these things with it. We need the same kind of thing here, because copyright, as important as it is to our work, is definitely not made for people who want to share things, right? I mean, it's not sufficient for that, right? It's actually kind of meant to do the opposite. So in this instance, where in this model, the copyright isn't sufficient. It kind of gets in the way, and we need a way around it, and the way around it is a license like that GNU license. And that's when we're talking copyrightable material, this is the license that has become the standard internationally. It's the Creative Commons license. how many people are familiar with not just heard about it, but are familiar with them? Okay, not bad. I'd say third to half. That's great. I'm really briefly going to talk about this, so I'm sorry if you do know something about them. Basically, what it means is that if you put a Creative Commons license on something, just like the new license was put on Moodle, you're basically telling people, hey, I'm still the copyright holder, but here's some permissions I'm giving you. Here's some things you can do with it. So I'm giving up some of my rights, basically. You know, you've heard all rights reserved. That's the copyright phrase. You're basically saying, I'm giving up some rights. I'm telling you up front, too, so you don't have to call me and ask, which is typically what we do if we want to copy something that's copyrighted, right? You got to go to the Copyright Permissions Office and get clearance and a license and pay them money, probably. So this symbol is a Creative Commons license symbol, CC. It's not closed captioned. I believe that's in a square, maybe. I don't know. Creative Commons. Creative Commons is a nonprofit organization created by some of the country's smartest intellectual property lawyers. Larry Lessig was one of them, if you know who he is. He briefly ran for president, I think, this last time around. And what they do, the sole thing they do is make these licenses that help people share things. Copyrightable intellectual property. You can share any kind of copyrightable intellectual property by putting one of these licenses on. You can put one of those licenses on a movie. I know movies that have Creative Commons licenses on them. There's lots of music out there, lots of photos. Anything, you know, text-based, anything that's copyrightable, you can put one of these things on. And you're telling people, hey, my intent is to share this, right? Plus, here are the side benefits. And by the way, if you share something, that means for free. I mean, like, it gives you the right to share it without exchanging money or anything if you don't want to. Plus, there's other benefits as well. These licenses actually give you, generally, I'm kind of really paraphrasing here, but to make it really simple, the rights to do all these things with some limitations we'll talk about briefly. Copy, share, edit. You can actually edit the work. Mix it with something else, keep it forever if you want to, which is not what you can do with most textbooks nowadays. If they are, you know, we're moving toward that digital lease kind of model, the Netflix model with textbooks, and you can use it for whatever you want. So that's what those licenses, I'm going to whip through these as fast as I can, okay? These are the 6 Creative Commons licenses. There are different flavors of the license. I'm just telling you this because if you see this, you'll be proud of yourself that you know this now, right? It's really simple. It'll take 2 minutes. You'll notice that these are made of symbols. And this just means it's a Creative Commons license. But these other symbols are really just combinations of these 4. So if you understand these 4, you understand all of the licenses. Okay, you ready? Be a quiz. Or, sorry, an assessment. The by part, it means that you can do all these things with my, here's my textbook. You can do all these things with it, but you need to say who it's by. You need to attribute me. That by one usually is the attribution, is what it's called, the attribution component. You'll notice that all the licenses have that on it. It's the most basic piece. It's fit, you know, you can do all these things with it, but just be fair. I wrote it and NC means non-commercial, right? So it means, here's my textbook. You can do all these things with it, but if you want to make money on it, we're reverting back to, you need to call me and we need to work something out. Okay? Some people, that's important to them. They want things to go out there, but they don't feel right about someone else profiting from their work. SA is my least favorite, well, almost. SA is the most confusing. It's share alike. It's what it stands for. It means, I'll give you an example later, but so if you don't understand it right now, don't worry about it. It means, here's my textbook. You can do all these things with it. If you edit it or mix it with something else, in other words, if you make something new out of it, a derivative, right, which you have the right to do. Like, let's say, here's my textbook. You rip 3 chapters out and you put in your own. You put in your own photos, some more problem sets, whatever. It's if it has the SA license, it says, okay, sorry. Here's a textbook. You can do all these things with it, but if you edit it or mix it, you have to reshare that new work with the same license I used. So here's one with an essay on it. Like if this was my textbook and you made something new out of that textbook, your new textbook has to have this license on it. All right, and the last one is kind of not thought of as, well, it's the most restrictive and oftentimes kind of left out of the conversation because it's so restrictive. It means no derivatives. It means, here's my textbook, you can do all these things with it, except you can't edit it, you can't mix it, you can't change it at all. You can use it, you can copy it, you can keep it, share it, but don't change it. You'll notice that the ND and the SA are never together because the SA means if you change it, then you have to do this. But the ND says you can't change it. So that's the licenses. I actually won't quiz you. Okay, I'll keep moving. Here's an example. Here's the quiz, or the assessment, I'm sorry. We'll assess you on this is an authentic assessment, right? This is an actual web page with a license on it. MIT's OpenCourseWare, which I assume most EdTech people are aware of, which is one of the first kind of open initiatives. This is a clipping from the bottom of the web page, and it has a by NCSA. So what this means, what was up there was a video. I used to be a high school physics teacher. It was a video of physics demonstration of something exploding, and those kinds of things students love. So it basically means I can take that video, put it on my Moodle site. What are the stipulations, though? Give attribution to MIT. Don't charge for it, which isn't an issue for faculty, instructors. Share alike means that if I change it, which means if I make a clip of it, that's changing it. I'm making a new thing. I have to share that new clip with that license by NCSA. Or if I translate it to another language, or I transcribe it, or I do something with it, it has to have that same license. TED Talks, you're all familiar with. If you catch at the end of a TED Talk, you'll see the Creative Commons logo, and then that's by NC and D. What's the ND mean again? No derivative. So I have no idea why TED insists on that, but they can. They're the copyright holder. They get to choose the terms. So what that means is you cannot make a clip of it. You can't translate it to another language. You can't, but you can use it. You can copy it, keep it. So those are the Creative Commons licenses. And the word I haven't used yet here, I haven't really used the word open yet, have I? I've been talking about free, even though that was in the title and we're an hour in. Anything that has a Creative Commons license on it like this is considered open, like an open textbook. Is a textbook that is licensed with one of these licenses. That's what an open textbook is. It's not a digital textbook. It's not a free textbook. I mean, they may be those things, but that's not the definition of what open is. The definition of open of an open textbook is a textbook that is licensed in a way to give you these permissions, which allows it to be free and allows it to be copied and allows it, and it's really hard to do that with paper. So they tend to live in the digital world, these books. But you could, I have a whole bunch of printed open textbooks on my desk at work. And if I wanted to go over to the copy machine and copy them, I'm good. It's legal. Okay. I'm not going to go over this. I'm kind of going to push through here a little bit. But I do want to point out one other important piece here. This is one example of an open textbook. I picked it because it's a good, it has a lot going for it. So I want to show you what the best could look like, all right? Because a lot of times the assumption is it's free, so therefore quality, ancillary materials, probably not. But that's not necessarily true. That's why I'm showing you this good one. It's a 2-semester algebra-based physics. They now have a calculus-based physics. This is made by Rice University, the one that was very well funded. It's a big book. You can get it in any format. Not any format. PDF, EPUB, print. You can read it on the web. The print version, of course, is going to cost something, right? Because it's paper and ink. But it tends to be about 20% of what a commercial textbook like this would cost. So this one's somewhere between $40 and $50. This would be easily a $200 to $250 textbook. But here's the one I want to show you. Anybody familiar with Bookshare? So see if correct me if I'm describing this incorrectly, right? It's a service, an online service. You can upload content to it and then download accessible versions of that content. It converts it into things like Braille printing, DAISY format, which is standard for screen readers and baked into EPUB, I believe. Did I get that pretty good? So it's something that you cannot do with commercial content because it's locked down. There's no way you can upload it to this site. There's no, right? This is one benefit of being open. You can start doing stuff with the content, building services on top of it. There are also PowerPoint slides and structures manuals. There's all sorts of ancillary services that Rice University is connected to this book, like web-assigned things that are aligned with the book and things that might cost a little bit of money. But like if you want it, it's there. Like any ancillary thing that you really want for this book, you're going to find it. So here's one last piece before I let you go. Ooh. All right. This is one of the side benefits, but I'm as excited about this as I am about the problem we spent the first half an hour talking about, affordability. That's huge. But from a pedagogy perspective, it's really exciting. And I want to show you 3 examples of things that people have done, starting from the most simple to the most, I don't know, interesting or things that I'm excited about. Here's the first one. Really simple. Statistics professor at Minnesota adopted this open textbook, Collaborative Statistics. She and 2 other faculty teach statistics with spreadsheets. It's the very low-level statistics, right? They don't use R or SPSS or whatever. They use Excel. She used this for a year and said, oh, it was pretty good, but she ended up editing it and making a new version of it and basically wrote into every section some kind of like examples and how-tos on how to use Excel. They made a whole bunch of problems, like 1,000 of them, stuck them in the book. You'll see that they call themselves collection editors and then add themselves to the list of authors. So they're giving attribution to the original authors, and there's more specific attribution in the book about who wrote what. But so she still uses this to this day. This was probably 4 years ago she did this. The author, I know one of the authors, Barbara Orlowski, she's thrilled that these faculty did this with her book. Every time she sees me, she's like, yeah, University of Minnesota, yay. And they still use it because it's perfect for their course. There's no more, well, do these parts but not these parts, and she can do exactly what she wants. Here's a math professor who adopted this open algebra book. He then went through and made very, very, very simple videos, just using a screen capture, voice capture, PowerPoint slide thing, and then he embedded links into the open textbook in every problem set. So it says, are you stuck? Click here. And the students will then go to YouTube where he will explain to them how to do those problems. So some really kind of nice just-in-time kind of coaching. Here's an example of the video. The one thing he did get help with is the University of Minnesota rouser. I don't know why he needs that on the video, but he decided he did, I guess.
Adding and subtracting vectors. You should be familiar with the Cartesian
It's a little
coordinate
anticlimactic.
system and with vectors.
Adding and
In this
subtracting
lesson,
vectors.
We will define some basic properties of vectors and learn how to add
So
vectors.
he made
subtract
dozens of
vectors,
these, and they were really
and
simple.
scale
These are
vectors.
his lecture slides
That is,
anyway,
make
basically.
vectors longer or
So
shorter
he just kind of
without changing their
repurposed those.
direction.
You guys want to learn about
Think of
vectors?
the ordered pair.
Okay, all right. So here's the last example. This is an example by David Wiley, and David is kind of known as the father of open education. He's a Brigham Young, or he was a Brigham Young. He has kind of the same kind of background. He has a ed tech background. His Ph.D. is in educational technology. He was teaching this course, Project Management for Instructional Designers. And there is no textbook, or I should say there was no textbook for that specific niche kind of topic. So what he did, and these are master's degree students, is he spent the semester with them editing a project management open textbook to be this, Project Management for Instructional Designers. So they took they took things out that were about business projects, whatever, and made them instructional design projects. They recorded videos and linked to those videos, videos of instructional designers talking about how they manage projects. They aligned the book with some project management standards. And the coolest thing about this is these students are now authors. And isn't that kind of what we aspire for our students? Like the highest level is creating new knowledge, right? Isn't that what we want our students to do? So these are some 3 quick examples of what these licenses allow you to do as far as editing and revising, remixing, right? So when I started this thing, and now I can't believe how long it's been, but it's been over 5 years. But I mean, this is kind of the thing that kept me going. I went to the Kennedy Center, and this was engraved on the wall. And this came from Kennedy's inauguration address, where he basically laid out this plan, specifically talking about Russia, because they were really in the middle of the Cold War at that point. And basically, he said he laid out this: we want to achieve civility, we want to achieve some unity, we want arms control, we want to explore together the wonders of science, we want to explore the stars and eradicate disease. And he laid out this list of probably unattainable things, at least completely attainable. And this might feel familiar to you, I don't know, but this is always really inspiring to me, because it's basically saying, yeah, this may be true. We may never get to where we're kind of going, but it's the right thing to do. And so, so let us begin. That was the title, and this would be great if I wrapped up the speech right here with my title. No. I do want to show you one thing. We're no longer in this space. We're not in the space of being wishful about it and saying we're not going to achieve it. I honestly think we will make leaps and bounds in the next few years. 5 years ago next week, I launched the Open Textbook Library. So faculty had an easy place to find open textbooks. There are now 382, as of this morning, open textbooks in there. That's what I heard from faculty. Like, I know how to go to Pearson and look under biology, and boom, like, how do I find these things on the internet? This was an attempt to do that. The traffic on the Open Textbook Library site it took me like 3 years to get, like 100,000 visits. We're now getting that in like a month, easily. I created the Open Textbook Network about 2.5 years ago, and this is basically a network of institutions working on the common good around open content and open textbooks. We now have 380 institutions represented nationally. About 65 members representing 380 institutions. So the blue dots are like consortia or statewide systems that have joined. And what we do is we give them very concrete, active things to get their faculty to adopt textbooks immediately. Like they're going to, not immediately, it takes time, but to take action immediately, not just stand around and think about it for a while. We run faculty workshops. 46% of the faculty coming out of these workshops, after we do what we do with them, say that they intend to adopt an open textbook. We've been doing this for years. We kind of have it down about how to talk about this. And what you find out is that faculty are there. Like they get it. They're aligned with this. There are very few, I should say, naysayers. They're kind of like, oh yeah, this just kind of makes sense. And wow, I can really, help my students that way. Awesome. One thing we ask them to do is write reviews of the textbooks. That's another thing that helps faculty adopt, is understanding quality. It better help them. They better look at the quality. As of about 2 hours ago, the 1,000th review was written for the books in that. And so we're moving really fast now. It's not just us giving workshops. Now it's people on that map giving workshops every week and moving forward with this. One last thing, I think it's one last thing. There's now research out showing that open content, if you look at student outcomes, which is what this is all about, right? Looking at like retention rates and grades and things like that, 95% of the time you have the same or better outcomes with open content than with commercial content. In my mind, we should be getting from this point where if you adopt something open, you have to kind of justify it. Flip that around. Like if you were assigning something that costs $250 and there's an open alternative, you should really be justifying that. The research doesn't really justify it. So what can you do? I was told once that if you give a speech and you don't ask the audience to do something, you've wasted both their time and yours. So here we go. Educate yourself. I mean, look into this, read about this. If you have staff, get them involved in this. I made one of my instructional designers, I said, about 2 years ago, I said, I want you to become an open textbook instructional designer. The work is the same. It's the environment that's different. Instead of working for an online course, you're going to work within a book and understand pedagogical effectiveness in a textbook. Join a community that's dedicated to this work. That's how we all advance, right? That's why you're here. Find one that's specific to open, and I've got a good one for you. And ultimately, this is the solution. If we can make this work, I know I didn't define that work very well here today, maybe, but if we can make this work part of what we do every day, like it is part, just like educational technology, instructional design, accessibility, all of those things we do for the good of our students, if we can make this part of that, hopefully I've convinced you that we can make an impact on that. If you're interested in joining this community, the Open Textbook Network is there, and this is what we're for. I don't mean this to necessarily be a plug, but we are there. And if you're interested in any of this, just can go to open.umen.edu. It'll bring you both to the library, and it'll bring you to the information about the Open Textbook Network. Here's my info. And if for whatever reason you want to use these slides, hey, look at that. What does that mean? Give me credit for, yes. No, so they're openly licensed. You can download them on SlideShare there. I just uploaded them this morning, so these slides are there. The videos aren't there, but the links are, because it's just too big. The links are there if you want to see the videos. I think that's it. Thank you very much. Have a good rest of the conference. Thank you, sir.
Big thanks to David Ernst for coming out here and talking to us about this. This is a really important issue, and I hope you all see better now how you can integrate it into the work you do with your faculty and with your institutions. We're in a unique place to help faculty not only create things on their own, but to utilize resources like this. I think we all owe David another round of applause. So one more round of applause.